Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. So in today's video we're going to be taking a look at guitar tones in Ableton using nothing but stock plugins. Let's get into it. So welcome back, Chris here. You've heard the intro. We're going to be taking a look at some guitar tones. I want to make a quick disclaimer. This video isn't going to be on how to get the best guitar tone using Ableton type thing, because everyone's going to have a different guitar. Everyone's going to have a different setup. So this video is more about showing you different combinations of plugins you can put together, different chains of effects you can use, and maybe giving you a slightly better idea of the tools you can use to get your tone. And then it's really going to be a lot of experimentation and seeing what works for you. This is what works for me. Every project is different. Every project requires a little bit of experimentation, but I figure why not share the information and maybe you can learn something from this video. So with that in mind, let's dive into it. So first things first, just to give you an idea of what I'm going to be using today, I have this GNL American Fullerton. This is my go-to. It's my only go-to. And for me, it ticks a lot of boxes. What I really like is that it has two tone knobs. So it's kind of like a high filter and a low filter, like so. So there's your high filter. And then the low filter's already on. So if I had to add all the low end back, that's taking it away. So I find that quite convenient because it allows me to sculpt my guitar tone depending on the sound I'm going to go for. But again, this is all going to vary whether you have single coil pickups, humbuckers or whatever, so it's worth experimenting with the different plugins. But with that in mind, let's dive into some of the plugins we're going to use. So I should quickly mention I have one pet peeve about my whole setup. Because there's a lot of things plugged in power-wise, there's a lot of interference in the air. So I actually have to play guitar facing away from the computer, because if I face the computer, you get this interference. So if I pull away, you can hear that goes away. So most of the time I'm usually facing this way or just facing the back, and that helps get rid of all the interference. Which is a good plus, keep that in mind. So there's a couple of plugins I like to shine some light on. Some of them are pretty obvious, one of which is the amp, the other one is the cabinet. They work very well together. On top of that, I tend to use the pedal and saturator, and as of recently I've been finding myself using the hybrid reverb, but we'll get into that. So just looking at the first two, the amp and the cabinet, we start from, I'll turn them off for now, but we'll start from just our clean DI sound. So that's our plain DI sound. I'm running through the Universal Audio Apollo Twin, so I've got a pretty clean preamp on the way in. Then we'll add the amp. You can hear that interference, so I'm going to turn away. You can hear it adds a lot of that amp sound, but now I'm going to add the cabinet and you're going to hear it clean up a bit. That's maybe a bit more of the direction I would take it. Right now it's very bassy and muffled, which will be cleaning up eventually. But let's quickly break down what's going on here. So when I was playing around and putting these preset chains together, something I was playing with was even the different pickups I'm using. So in this case, for this preset, I had it set on the bridge pickup, so it should be a lot cleaner. There you go. So that's the first sound we're working with. Now, with just these two plugins, there's a lot of possibilities available. You have all of these different styles of amps you can pick from, including a bass amp at the end. And I find these are all very versatile, but personally, I find myself using the amps more on the clean side and then driving it through either the pedal or some saturator. And that is what I find works for me. You can use the rock, the lead, the heavier ones, and tweak them accordingly, but I find I get a better result from using a cleaner amp and then distorting it before on the way in. So the setup I've got currently, I'm basically emulating the amp I've got here. I've got a Fender Blues Deluxe, and it's a 1x12 amp. Normally I mic it with a 57, so I'm using a dynamic on there. And I'm basically going for the similar thing. This boost or the blues, I find both are kind of that Fender realm. And then it's a 1x12 I've got selected. I've got it on dynamic. and there's nothing stereo going through it, so it's just on the mono setting. You have the option to change how the microphone is on the cabinet. I just leave it near on axis because that's normally how I would mic it up, and this gives me a really good starting place. Right now it's a bit on the crunchy side. If I had to go more towards the clean side, I would probably use something like this. And that I find is a really good starting place for some clean tones. As of recently, I've found myself making my guitar tones slightly wetter and wetter in the sense of using a lot more reverb, but not just like a long-tailed kind of reverb which adds this length to the sound. It's more a really short one to add a bit of depth and almost make it sound like you're playing it in a room. So what I really like about these hybrid reverbs, for example, is that I can select to use the convolution IR, which is the impulse response capturing a certain room. It's like you're sampling the sound of a room basically. And they have a lot of different options in terms of categories that you can pick. The first one is early reflections, which gives you like a really tight room sound. So if I play it off and then on, you'll hear what it's adding to the sound. So it adds a little bit, very subtly adds a little bit of stereo. If you're listening on headphones or speakers, you might hear what that's adding. But it also takes it from being right in front of your face and pulls it back slightly, which I quite like, that it's not very direct. For my clean tones, we've added the amp, we've added the cabinet, added a slight impulse response of a small room just to give it a bit more depth in the sound. Again, working with the clean sound, I find myself adding a little bit of compression. Here I've got it on a ratio of 4.2 to 1 in this case. The attack is quite fast at 1 millisecond and the release is at 24 milliseconds. And this I find just smooths out my playing a bit, the dynamics. Like I find this guitar and my playing tend to be quite all over the place. Maybe it's because I'm not the best guitarist, but at least it helps bring that a bit together and make everything just sound a bit tighter. So going back to our more crunchy, heavier tones, I'll do the second one actually, because the neck pickup one that I've got is a bit darker. And one thing I find when I'm tracking electric guitar is contrast between your tones helps quite a bit. If I'm double tracking a guitar, I want it on both sides, I might change the pickup so one is on the neck, one is on the bridge. I might dial the EQ slightly differently, and it just helps create a bit of separation between the two. Maybe sometimes you want it to sound the same and just add a similar kind of width, but I like to have a little bit of separation and have the tones slightly different to just be a bit more pleasing to the ears, I find. I might just pull that reverb back a bit. Now, to get the drive in this sound, I am using a saturator, so this will be the clean sound. And it's not super clean. It's got a little bit of gain to it, but with that saturator, adding a nice little bit of gain before there, so I'm getting that distorted sound. But another option would be using this pedal. I find myself using this when I want a more aggressive form of distortion. Usually I'm reaching for the fuzz module because it really adds a bit of a unique type of distortion. And then I find the overdrive is quite dark and the distortion is a bit on the brighter side, but you get a good balance between them if you play with them. I also find myself thinking about this setup as I would in real life. So if this was the pedal on my pedal board, that would usually go before the amp and then the amp into the cabinet, the reverb afterwards. If I'm thinking of it more in a studio way, I might put the compressor afterwards as if I'm recording into a compressor. But if you wanted to think of it more in a guitarist kind of way, you might put the compressor before your amp as if you had a compressor plugin. It's all up for experimentation, but I would suggest trying it out and seeing what works for you. But taking a look at the pedal plugin, I find myself using fuzz a lot of the time because it has this unique character. But then distortion I find is a lot clearer and brighter. And then overdrive is a bit on the darker side. Now bear in mind, you can almost quickly EQ these sounds just by selecting which pickup you're using, or if you had a tone on your guitar, you could also quickly tweak that. And that would be a bit cleaner than just your neck pickup sound. So lots of possibilities there. Again, even using the EQ on the pedal before it goes into the amp will give you a certain type of result, as well as picking a different cabinet size. For example, we go for a 412 instead of a 1x12. So you get a couple different variations. Even say you want a brighter sound instead of a dynamic, I could be using a condenser. Possibilities are endless. I look at all of these moves as almost different types of EQing to the sound, whether I'm using a condenser mic or a dynamic, whether I'm EQing on the pedal or the amp, the choice of different pickups, this and that. You know, there's a lot of different ways you can slightly tweak your sound to get the result you might be looking for. I guess it just depends where you end up reaching to do that. So looking at the next guitar chain that I created, this is more of an effect kind of sound where you've got a bit of delay and reverb. Still quite crunchy, but now you've got that quarter note delay going on. So this is a similar chain to what we were just using before, but in this case I've labeled it as mid for the middle pickup. And again, that's just to add a little bit of contrast between the two sounds we've already got using the neck pickup and the bridge pickup, somewhere to sit in between. And I've also combined this with, again, a similar effect, but instead of a delay, I'm going heavier on the reverb. I've picked this Guitar Room preset on the hybrid reverb, as well as this classic chorus on the chorus and ensemble plugin. And that's giving us a sound like this. So I'm carrying across a lot of the same things. I'm using the saturator, the amp, the cabinet, all on the same settings. The hybrid reverb adding that room sound. And after that, I'm using the chorus and the hybrid reverb just to give us more of that modulated space kind of sound. You can also think of this as an interesting way to make a single stereo guitar tone. If I arm both these tracks, pan one left and one right. We've got the delayed sound on one side, the chorus reverb sound on the other side, and that just gives us a nice little bit of width. So because I'm using the same amp and cabinet combination on both sounds, the guitar sounds quite mono, whereas the effects are in the stereo field, you could say. But I could go in, I could change one to blues, put it on 212 condenser, and that is going to make it sound a little bit more stereo because now one sound is slightly different to the other. And there you have it. Those are some of the stock plugins I find myself reaching for when I go to do some guitar in Ableton. Obviously, there's unlimited combinations of plugins you can use. I didn't even dive into maybe some of the more obscure ones, like using something like Erosion, for example. you can get some really wild sounds just by playing with a couple of these combinations. The possibilities are really endless. Now, if you enjoyed this video, please feel free to let us know in the comment section below. I'd love to know what you thought. If you have anything to contribute, please feel free to let us know. Maybe you can tell us what plugins you're using for your guitar tones. These are obviously the stock ones. I do have a collection of more premium style plugins, which I also find myself reaching for. If you'd like to know more about that, let us know below and I'll be happy to do a video on it. But don't forget to like and subscribe. The support really helps, and thank you to anyone who's done so already. And once again, I've been Chris Vella, and I'll see you on the next one.